To item 5.1.1, which is the professionalism policy, and I'm going to pass it over to Director Ennis. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much, Chair Shuttleworth, and good evening, everyone. Once again, thank you for providing me with this opportunity to speak on this issue. This evening, we are presenting a draft professionalism policy for trustee consideration and for the community. Policies are frameworks on which we build further procedures that become operationalized. I will be turning this over a little bit later to Superintendent Taha to speak in more detail about the draft policy. First, I'd like to acknowledge that our board has received a tremendous amount of attention on this policy, perhaps more than we have received in recent history. I want to also acknowledge that there have been threats against our students and our schools and our staff, and these have been distressing and heartbreaking. While we work hard with the police to ensure student safety, it is deeply upsetting for our entire community to watch as some individuals continue to threaten the very students they claim to stand for. We can disagree, but to threaten students and schools is simply unacceptable. It has not been easy, and in many instances, the personal attacks on members of our team, on trustees, on staff, has been disheartening. I've dedicated over 27 years of my life to education, and I can tell you that students has always been and continues to be at the very heart of everything that I do. We take our responsibilities to students very seriously. Since the moment that I've had the privilege of joining the Halton District School Board, I have been met with a community that has a strong sense of togetherness and a strong sense of belonging, where each student, as I visited schools, and I've been to almost 100 schools, a sense of belonging has always been paramount in our schools, where students and staff and those who are new to the community have told us that they feel that they are accepted and that they belong. That is a very proud moment for me as director and for us as a board when I visit schools. We take great pride in the inclusiveness and the compassion and the respect for human rights that our students and their families feel. We have done our very best to draft a policy that prioritizes education and the learning environment for our students. At the same time, we're holding firm to our values of inclusion, and I know that this board holds that in very high regard. I've always been proud of this board and continues to be for the great successes that we've enjoyed. Our academic achievements are among the very highest in the province of Ontario, and we continue to be a shining light across the province of Ontario. This is a true testament to the dedication and professionalism of the staff of the Halton District School Board. They have done that for years and continue to do that. As a father of four, and as an educator who have worked with countless families, I genuinely understand the important roles that we have as caregivers and parents while students are in our care. I also know that parents want and deserve to have their voices heard, which brings me to the consultation that we have embarked on. Though through staff and trustees, this, I want to assure our community, is a very genuine and authentic process where we want to capture your voices to inform us on how the final policy will reflect. Since we have launched this consultation, we have had over 4,000 responses so far. I want to thank all of you who have taken the time to respond to the survey, despite the gradation and conversation that we had earlier. Your responses have been appreciated. We are listening. We want to hear from you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Superintendent Taha.
Thank you, Director Ennis. Good evening, Madam Chair, trustees, senior team, members of the public in the gallery. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak tonight to the professionalism policy. In my brief comments tonight, I will touch on three aspects of this process. I want to speak briefly to the legal environment within which we're operating. The other theme or key aspect I want to touch on is the policy itself, some of its attributes and some of its structures or properties. And finally, I will speak to, as Director Ennis alluded to, the consultation process that we've engaged in. As the Board of Trustees has been previously advised by staff and legal counsel, we are currently, the Halton District School Board and school boards across the province, in the process of collective bargaining with our teachers' unions and education workers' unions. This process has not obviously reached its conclusion. What this means is that until new collective agreements are reached and ratified, we cannot alter the working conditions of our employees, be it teachers or education workers or non-unionized employees. So as a result, what you see before you, this draft policy is a policy that takes that very detail into consideration. So what the policy outlines is existing expectations, existing professional standards that reside and live in a variety of sources, such as the Ontario College of Teachers Professional Standards of Practice, expectations and provisions that exist in existing HDSB policies and procedures, expectations and norms that exist in case law, Supreme Court, for example, as well as ministry standards and statutory standards that already exist and that engage the employment relationship. So that's one key aspect of the reality that we work within which this policy is being developed, the idea that collective agreements have not been ratified. The other key piece that I want to touch on is the policy itself, what a policy is, its structures, and its purpose. Policies, you might have heard, are not operational in nature. That's the very reality of a policy. The purpose they provide is they are essentially a framework or a roadmap from which a procedure, a companion procedure, or a guideline may be developed. If you were to look at the HDSB policies that are listed on our board website, hdsb.ca, you will see that they are quite similar to the draft policy that is before you for consideration. You will see that there's the what and the why. And the what is enshrined in the objective section and the why is enshrined in the principles section. And this draft policy is consistent with those properties or attributes or structures. Now, should the Board of Trustees decide to pass this policy, and its final format or its final state will guide the development of an administrative procedure, which would outline the how, the when, the who, and the what. So essentially a policy, the final draft of this policy, will then guide us on how we operationalize that in a companion document, be it a procedure or a guideline. So that's another piece of consideration that we need to be mindful of as we draft this policy and we go through this exercise. However, before we begin finalizing what the draft ought to look like, and before we determine whether the policy can stand alone or whether it needs a companion procedure or a guideline, we have to listen to our community members. We want to ensure that we have given everyone the chance to provide their feedback, i.e. our stakeholders, some of whom are in our gallery today. That includes Halton parents, students, teachers, and our federations and other stakeholders. As mentioned earlier, an electronic survey was launched on February the 24th, and some of the delegates have commented on some of the issues with that survey, and their feedback is well appreciated. That survey will close on March the 12th of 2023. We know it's important to our staff, and particularly to this Board of Trustees, to hear the voices of our community. We know that. We've heard that loud and clear, and to take into consideration their feedback when approving this policy and what it looks like in its final state, and any companion procedures that may be derived out of it. As far as responses and commentary from stakeholders, they will be aggregated and provided to the Board of Trustees with an accompanying report and a final policy for approval. So that's also part of the process, and that is to aggregate the feedback from our stakeholders. And I heard Director Ennis allude to the fact that there's up to date 4,300 responses to date, which is a good response rate. I want to close by saying that we always strive to have the highest standards and highest expectations for educators who work in the Halton District School Board. This particular policy looks to affirm those expectations. At the same time, as Director Ennis pointed out, it looks to prioritize students and balance an environment that is inclusive, equitable, and follows our principles of human rights. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Taha. We do have a question. Vice Chair Rocha.
Through you, Chair, to Superintendent Taha and Director Ennis, and to the public. I read the report. I read the draft policy. I do have many comments, but I'm going to start off with one, and I will let the rest of my colleagues here ask some questions. So I want to preface this by saying that having a professionalism policy isn't intended to be punitive, nor does it suggest that professionalism is a problem at our board. And on the contrary, upholding professionalism is a positive thing. HDSB staff are highly regarded, and as Director Ennis alluded to earlier, in fact, we are the highest achieving school board in Ontario, while being the lowest funded on a pure pupil basis. So what that means is we do a lot with a little. We do the most with the least. So while I'm glad to see that this draft policy indicates that we already have policies in place and regulators to hold staff accountable, can you explain how professionalism is currently upheld at the HDSB? So in other words, when staff members are unprofessional, what are we currently doing today, or what can be done to address situations where staff members are unprofessional?
Thank you for the question, Vice Chair Rocha. Through you, Chair Shuttleworth, I want to thank you, Vice Chair Rocha, for acknowledging the great work of the staff and the professionalism of the staff in the Halton District School Board. We hold our staff in the highest regard. They have displayed the highest level of professionalism. And so there are moments, there are times when every school board will have to deal with an issue. And I know that we have the policies, the statutes, and the guidelines and principles and policies in place to deal with that when they arise. We have been doing that for decades. And so I'm going to ask Superintendent Taha if he could speak with some more specificity to that question.
Thank you, Director Ennis. Through you, Madam Chair, to Vice Chair Rocha. You're absolutely correct. There's an impressive inventory of policies, procedures, statutes that engage the employment relationship. Obviously, as we have indicated on so many occasions, and as Director Ennis pointed out, we have high expectations of our staff, our education workers, our teachers, our corporate staff, expectations of ourselves. Having said that, every situation is not clear cut. So with respect to how do we handle professionalism in the workplace, every situation requires its own analyses, its own adjudication. And which is why the work is complicated, and which is why our procedures have to be well thought out. So again, we hear the concerns of our community in this case with respect to a professionalism policy. We take the feedback of the community into account, and we will report back to you in terms of what this means in terms of a new policy and a possibly a companion procedure. But in terms of your question as to what happens currently in the system when issues arise, again, there are existing policies, procedures that we can point to, and existing steps and mechanics by which staff engage the board with respect to this conduct and how we adjudicate it.
I'm good for now. I do have another question, but I will defer to other trustees.
Okay. Trustee Zhang.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Through Chair to Director and Superintendent. So I want to discuss a question about the inconsistent information from the report 23037. So this is the report we are doing presentation today. So on the report, page 2, it says, as an employer, the HDSB has the authority to take a reasonable measure under the management rights and the provincial code and conduct, the PPM 128, to create a professionalism policy. So that means we have the rights to create such policy. And on the same, in the same report, it says, on the same page, it says, the Board of Trustees has been advised by the staff and the legal counsel that adopting new policy during the period of statutory freeze period under the Labor Relations Act, so they will have a legal challenge. That means we may not have the rights to create such policy. So that's this is inconsistent information from the same report. And on the same page 7, I found this, and in the section financial impact, it says the financial impact of the policy is unknown at this time due to a number of challenging factors, including but not limited to the current statutory freezing period under the Labor Relations Act. So above statement from the same report says both the board has the right, we can, and probably we cannot create a professionalism policy. So this is inconsistent information from the same report. And that gives me two questions. So the question one is, does the board, as an employer, has the management rights? Because at this time, we already have a draft of the policy, but it seems to me our human resource management still have not confirmed we have the rights to create such policy. And the second question, since every new policy will affect, and the following procedure will affect how the employees to perform their job. So that means if we have a concern about the freezing period, and because we renew the contract every 4 years, and does it mean between these 4 years, the board has no rights to create any new policies? Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Zhang. Director Ennis?
Thank you, Chair Shuttleworth, through to Trustees Zhang. I wanted to just add a couple of pieces to the previous question around the, what do we do right now, and what statutes do we use to respond to issues of professionalism today. We have the Ontario College of Teachers. Has professionalism standards. We have the Education Act. We have our Code of Conduct. We have respectful workplace policies. And I could go on. There are a litany of different policies and statutes that we can use in order to address issues as they arise that we have been using, once again, for decades. But I'll turn this over to Superintendent Taha with respect to management rights and the statutory freeze.
Thank you, Director Ennis. Through you, Madam Chair, to Trustee Zhang. I think the report outlines that during a statutory freeze, so the idea that when collective agreements have expired and they haven't been renewed, management, well, yes, you have management rights, and those rights are enshrined in existing terms and conditions of employment, and you have every right to exercise those rights. During the period until a new collective agreement is renewed, you cannot create new rights. And so this is what this policy speaks to. This policy is a composite of existing rights, if I can term it that way. So we're not creating, well, it is a new policy in the sense that, it's a new document that we have developed, but its content is not new. So it's in that sense, it survives the statutory freeze, or in our opinion, it does. It may still be subject to a challenge, which is why we speak to a financial impact that could mean that in the view of our federations, that a new policy, whether it reaffirms existing rules and procedures or it doesn't, it may be subject to a challenge. So it's not so much an inconsistency. A new policy the draft policy that you see before you, perhaps the label new is maybe misleading. It's not new in the sense that what's in it is actually what already exists because of the statutory freeze. So I hope that clarifies it.
Oh, thank you. Can I follow up?
You have 3 seconds, Trustee Zhang, so maybe go back onto the speakers list to come back to you. Is that all right? Thank you. Trustee Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair Shuttleworth. First, I would like to say that the staff worked very hard to come up with this policy draft on such a short notice, and I guess they did their best. I have few comments and a question to Superintendent Taha. My observation after reading the draft is that there is no clear expectations from the policy, like what we are trying to achieve. I don't see the clear expectations that we are trying to achieve. And the second is the scope of this policy is left to anybody's interpretation. Like the scope is completely open. Anybody can interpret this in any way. It's not very specific, it's not precise, and it doesn't speak to the outcome. I feel that as a board, we are answerable to many stakeholders, and one of the most important ones are our students and the parents, community members, not to forget them, who take care of our underage school children. And as per the Education Act, our responsibility is, as Board of Trustees, is to implement the policies and implement the procedures. So the procedures is for the operations. So create and implement the policies. So my question to Superintendent Taha is, are we going to make this more specific so that we expect an outcome from this policy? Because right now, the way it is worded, like we have put together the cases from Supreme Court, and then we've quoted the teachers' college standard of practice for the teaching profession and whatnot. But what is the outcome that we are expecting from this policy? What is it that we want? So can we word it in a better way where it shows that we are expecting an outcome? Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Trustee Ahmed, thank you for your question. Great question. As I mentioned in my comments, policies as a document, they are not meant to be operational or mechanical in nature. So you spoke to specifics in terms of the how, the when, the who, compliance, reinforcement, and so on and so forth. Policies, again, in general, are not meant to serve that purpose. They provide a statement of principle, a statement of objective, which is clearly articulated in this document. Once this document has been finalized, after collecting the feedback of our stakeholders, and once it's in its final state, then we turn our attention to some of the things that you have raised, whether this policy needs a companion procedure, what that companion procedure ought to look like given the final state of this policy, its objectives, its principles. So you are quite right. It's not a technical manual in terms of what the day-to-day looks like on the ground, but that's, again, not the purpose of a policy.
Can I have the follow-up question, please?
You have 30 seconds.
Yes.
Can you do it?
Seconds. So, since Superintendent Taha brought up the feedback, so one of the feedback mechanisms we are using is the survey that we are floating around, that we sent out, and we just declared that the community supports the professionalism policy or the survey. And obviously, we have overwhelming evidence that the community or the stakeholders are not supporting the survey or the professionalism policy draft as it is circulated. So right now, the community sees us as not being up to the job or was dragging our feet. So are we doing anything to address that? Because you just you just said that you're counting on the feedback. So the feedback mechanism has been rejected by the community, the responses that we are getting.
Through you, Chair Shuttleworth, may I start? Thank you for the question, Trustee Ahmed. The consultation process, as I stated in my preamble, is a genuine and an authentic process in which we are seeking stakeholder feedback to inform us on our next step and to create the final draft policy. We have received in just a few short days almost 4,500, and I'm sure it's up now, responses. We're getting very good feedback, and we're getting good response rate. I am sure by the time this all closes around March 10th or 12th, we are going to have thousands upon thousands upon thousands of feedback. And that will be, through Dr. Bichelle and her team, will be collated and coordinated in a way that Board of Trustees can use to inform what the final policy will look like. So we are quite pleased with the response rate so far. And I believe that as time moves forward and we get closer to the end, we're going to be even more pleased by the response of the community.
Okay, Trustee Collard.
Thank you. I have a couple of things. For starters, I was hoping that we could get hyperlinks on all of the reference materials that are in the draft policy so that people in the public can easily find what those things are. I was also hoping that you could let me know when it comes to operationalizing this and developing an operational procedure for this. Do you foresee any difficulties in actually enforcing this policy? And if you could just give some examples of ways that you might find that this policy might be difficult to operationalize?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Trustee Collard, at the risk of repeating myself, I think we will be able to identify those challenges once the final state of this policy is achieved. What I can say to you, however, is, we've stated several times that what exists in this policy, some of the provisions and the language and the expectations that exist in this policy are provisions and standards and language that we have relied on to hold, where necessary, employees accountable in terms of whether their conduct meets those standards. So we're very familiar with the language and how it translates into how you engage with staff, how you engage with students. Human resources and human behavior is sometimes complex. Well, maybe not sometimes, always is complex. But we do have the training, do have the experience, the knowledge, and the skills to translate those provisions into practical expectations on the ground. But again, it wouldn't be fair for me to comment right now to say that this policy will not present any problems, or will it present problems as far as enforcement. But we'll turn our attention to that once it is in its final state. I think we'll have a better idea as to what companion procedures ought to be derived from it. But again, the language that exists in this policy is language that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. The Ontario College of Teachers, the Education Act, and so on and so forth. So we're very familiar with how that language in the abstract engages on the ground behavior.
Thank you. May I have a follow-up?
Yes, you have 2 minutes left.
Yes, it's probably through you to Director Ennis. We spoke earlier this evening about ensuring that school councils would have input. Is there going to be similar discussion points made available to the principals and the school council chairs to ensure that each school is given enough information to have a rich conversation about this during the month of March?
So you, just to be clear, to Trustee Collard, through the chair, you're asking if each school and school principal will be given directives to share with school councils about.
Yeah, to ensure that every school is getting the same information, will they be given information kits or packages so that they can discuss this policy with their school councils in somewhat the same fashion from school to school, so that school A is getting the same information as school B, as school C, because you want to make sure that the feedback we're getting from school councils is based on a baseline that's common amongst all schools?
Thank you for the question, Trustee Collard. I'm going to ask Dr. Bichella if you could just speak to, the collection of data, consistency across schools and school councils in particular.
Thank you very much for the question. So in terms of school councils, as I mentioned earlier, the chairs and the co-chairs of each school council have been emailed a process. They have a preamble to essentially share with their members on their school council, and they have the survey on hand. We've asked them to meet with their respective members and to collate a collective voice that represents that particular school council. They might do so through a survey, or they might also choose to write a letter that conveys the voice of the school council and email that letter to the email address that has been set up for this consultation. So that is the process to reduce burden on administrators, the school administrators. So we did not choose to relay the information to the administrators. Rather, we went directly to the chairs and the co-chairs. I'll also mention that the parents that sit on those school councils would have also received a personal invitation to provide their feedback from a parent and guardian perspective. So those voices would be represented both from a function of a school council and also as a parent and guardian stakeholder.
Thank you for that. And if I may ask one more follow-up, will we be given information regarding how many of the school councils responded when we get the collated feedback, so that we can see how many school councils actually participated in giving feedback? I understand they've all been invited. I want to be able to have comfort in the number that actually respond, and perhaps we could be sending out reminders to them, because we do want to hear from everyone.
Thank you for that, Trustee Collard. Certainly through the chair, we absolutely would like to encourage as many school councils to provide feedback. I know that Dr. Bichelia and team are going to be providing us with a rich data set on which to disaggregate and to really look at in a very in a variety of ways. And so I don't know if you have any further comments, Dr. Bichelia?
Yeah, so I'll just mention that the survey links are tied to identifiers, and so we will be able to see where the feedback is coming from in terms of the school communities. And that's for the school council and the chairs. And I'll also just briefly mention that in addition to the 4,300 responses that we received to date, prior to this meeting, there was actually 7,000 additional ones that had already started. So the consultation itself, the survey itself, has reached a wide net of stakeholders. And in relation to some other consultations that we've done in the past and that we currently have, for example, the budget survey consultation, this is a much higher participation and much stronger interest. So the survey is one medium, but as I mentioned, the HDSB voice at hdsb.ca is also an additional medium the public can use to provide feedback.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Trustee Baxter.
Thank you, through your chair, Shuttleworth, to Director Ennis and Superintendent Taha. Given that the existing policies, standards, and statutes currently permit the board to enforce standards of professionalism if it decides to do so, do you anticipate the coming administrative procedure to impose requirements on staff that are not already in the existing policies and procedures that are referenced in the draft policy?
Director Ennis.
Thank you. Through the chair to Trustee Baxter. Certainly, as you've outlined, the procedure that will follow from the framework of the policy will have some specificity that we have not previously consolidated or collated or put forward to staff in any way, to the best of my knowledge. This is going to be new in terms of some of the specificity of what might be in that procedure. And so, while the policies are from existing policies, the procedure does not exist currently and would represent something new to staff. Trustee Superintendent Taha?
No, I don't have anything further to add. You've captured it.
Do you have a follow-up?
Just a clarification. So the procedure will have specificity, but not necessarily new material.
It will be new in that it does not currently exist. We don't have anything that currently exists for staff. So it will be new. And it would, as a procedure, it would also be more specific than the draft that trustees and community are looking at the moment. Does that help? Okay. We could try one more time.
I guess I was just asking about the content, not necessarily, will there be content in this procedure that is not currently existing as content in other standards, policies, procedures, statutes? Sorry.
Thank you, Trustee Baxter. Through you, Madam Chair. It is possible, but again, we have to see what the final state of this policy is if the policy passes. So it is possible that procedures may be brand new in content or brand new in format, and it's possible that they may not. And that's, have been, our commentary throughout. So I hope that clarifies your question.
Thank you, Trustee Baxter. All right, Trustee Zhang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we had a lot of discussion about should we have the policy? Can we have a policy, or what should be covered in the policy? So a lot of those questions. Actually, because the school board operation is under Ontario Education Act and related regulations. So I'd like to read one paragraph from the regulation 128. All students, parents, and teachers and other school staff have the right to be safe and to feel safe in their school community. Within the right comes the responsibility to contribute to a positive school climate. To foster a positive school climate that supports student achievement and well-being, school boards should focus on prevention and early intervention strategy to address inappropriate behavior. So to address inappropriate behavior is not a record. This is not just something we should do, we can do in that discussion. This is a legal requirement. This is our legal obligation to do it. Thank you.
Trustee Zhang, did you have a question in that statement or just a statement?
I have no more questions. This is just because I just want to give everyone some, the board, we need to have confidence to do a policy, to create a policy to address the inappropriate behavior. This is as the strategy is mentioned in the PPM 128. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Zhang. Vice Chair Rocha.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Superintendent Taha. Trustee Baxter, in a roundabout way, asked my question, but I'm having a hard time understanding something. If this draft policy is a collection of existing policies and procedures and regulations and whatnot, and earlier on you indicated when I asked, what do we do today when staff members are not being professional? You indicated that every situation is unique and every situation gets addressed uniquely. So if this draft policy is a collection of existing policies and we already have procedures in place to address unique situations, what is preventing us from passing this policy today as it is written and creating an accompanying administrative procedure? Now, not us trustees, but the director. What is preventing us from creating an administrative procedure that reflects the existing procedures? I know with Trustee Baxter, Director Ennis, you had alluded to this new procedure that would be created would have more specificity and it would incorporate feedback from the public. So barring that, what is preventing us today from passing this, which we're not going to do, but what is preventing us from creating a policy today and creating a procedure that spells out what is being done today?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Vice Chair Rocha, the short answer is nothing is preventing us from creating a procedure that speaks to existing provisions, given that what exists is already enshrined in other procedures to operationalize that. But in essence, that would be a duplication of procedures, if I understood your question correctly. So your question was, if this policy is an affirmation of existing policies and procedures, why not create a procedure that consolidates all these procedures? Did I understand you correctly? The answer, I wouldn't know what the purpose of what purpose would that serve?
So I guess my understanding is we don't have a procedure in place that addresses lack of professionalism. So if I'm wrong, please let me know and please share that procedure with me. But it was my understanding that we didn't have a procedure and we're being prevented from creating a procedure because of these statutory freezes. So my ask is, if we do have procedures in place, where is that procedure? And if it doesn't exist, why can't it be created today? Seeing as how it won't be any new information, it'll be existing information. Does that make it clearer?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Trustee Rocha, what prevents us from creating new procedures is the very fact that collective agreements have not been renewed. So if we are to create a procedure that defines professionalism as something entirely different than what exists today, how it is defined today, then we will be prevented from doing that. If you know, I don't know if I can be any clearer without, without violating any privacy rules. But again, if we are to create a procedure that redefines professionalism and operationalizes it in an entirely different way, hence creating new terms and conditions, then the fact that the working conditions are frozen in time until new agreements have been renewed, we can't do that. So again, as I said, there are existing procedures and policies that allow us to speak to conduct of employees or anyone for that matter. It applies to all those who engage the board. It all depends on, again, not every case is clear cut, not every situation is identical, which is part of the challenge in operationalizing what professionalism is.
May I follow up? I have 14 seconds. So I understand what you're saying about creating a new policy and a new procedure because that goes outside of statutory freezes. What I'm asking is there anything preventing us from just documenting what we do today? And I'm run out of time.
The answer is no. Nothing prevents us from documenting what exists today. I hope I understood what you're saying.
Yeah, so Trustee Oliver, somehow you got ahead of me. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, through you, Chair, to the Director. So in your report, you state that a policy is a broad statement of intent and reflects the goals of the Halton District School Board. And policy provides the framework within which board procedures are developed. And this has been reiterated a couple of times now. In drafting of the policy, did you seek legal advice? And if so, have you adhered to it while making this policy?
Through you, thank you, Director Ennis. Through you, Chair Shuttleworth, to Trustee Oliver. Absolutely, this policy must meet all of the responsibilities that we have as a board of trustees, as senior staff, as staff. So, absolutely, this policy has been reviewed in terms of whether it survives a host of pieces of legislation, be it the Human Rights Code, be it the Labor Relations Act, collective agreements, and so on and so forth. Obviously, that does not mean that a potential challenge may not be brought forward. But in our view, this policy, as it exists today, at least in its draft form, upholds these legal requirements and satisfies legislation. So, yeah.
Thank you. So I thought I was going to beat you, but I wasn't. So as I'm first-time speaker, I was going to leave it to let everybody else speak. But I just had, following up on Vice Chair Rocha's piece, my question is sort of in short form, is if these policies are not new, how does the statutory freeze impact them? Because they're already existing.
Through you, Madam Chair, to trustees, there is no impact for the very fact that they're not new.
Thank you for that, Superintendent Taha. So through you to you, Chair Shuttleworth, I think part of the confusion, if you will, is the delineation between policies and procedures. And I think once we understand and we're able to demarcate what is a policy and what is a procedure, I think it makes all the difference in the world in our understanding. And so I think that, the policies are not new. The, sort of consolidation of all of the various statutes and regulations, those are not new. What would be new would be a procedure, because it doesn't exist at the moment.
Okay, so again, just bear with me. So if there are policies that are in place that aren't new, procedures are put in place to follow the policies or to enact the policies. So if we don't have procedures to enact the policies, why would the policies be there?
Through the chair and to the Board of Trustees, many of the statutes that we have relied on and we're relying on are not necessarily policies of the Halton District School Board. We reference the Ontario College of Teachers, professional standards. That is something that applies right across the province to everyone. We've referenced the Education Act, on which every statute and regulation that governs school boards exist. We've referenced Supreme Court of Canada decision. So these are not necessarily policies as we know them within our board, but are statutes and regulations that exist currently that we're also relying on.
Okay, I'll leave it for now. Trustee Ahmed.
Through you, Madam Chair, I just ran out of time last time and I just followed the queue again to get a turn. I'm just following up on where I left off, talking about the feedback mechanism and feedback. We say here that we are seeking the consultations to measure the responses. So, and one of the ways it says that we are seeking the clarity and seeking clarity about what. And second is whether policy statements are aligned with the stated objectives. And I mentioned this earlier also that there are no clear objectives. So what objectives are we trying to see that whether they are aligned with the stated objectives or not? Because there is no outcome in mind. And as Superintendent Taha said, that policies don't speak to the outcome, that is procedures that speak to the outcome. So, but here we are saying that we are seeking the responses to see that the policy statements are aligned with the stated objectives. So there is no objective here. And also, in light of the above, how reliable the data is that we are collecting? Because we have, of course, we have received like 4,000 plus responses, but those responses came either before the arrangement of the answers were redone and corrected, or it came before, after the arrangement was corrected. When did the majority of the responses come? And are we planning to redo the survey for those people who have already submitted before that arrangement was done? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Trustee Ahmed, through the chair. To Trustee Ahmed and the rest of the trustees, the objectives, one of the objectives in the Education Act is to promote student achievement, well-being, promote a positive school climate, ensure the delivery of effective and appropriate education programs to ensure students to achieve their educational goals. That's an objective, and there are others that are listed there. But in terms of the technicalities around this survey, I'm going to turn to Dr. Bishalia to respond to that.
Thank you very much. So just to clarify, the survey was launched at 6 p.m. on Friday. The error was detected mid-afternoon on Saturday, and it was corrected in the evening on Saturday. Upon correcting that error, The responses that we received up to that point were downloaded and saved as a separate file so that we can analyze those responses separately to ensure that the switch from the position of the agree to the somewhat agree did not impact the ways in which respondents answered that question. I'll also say that the questions that appear as a table or a matrix in technical terms are only one set of questions that are provided on the survey, and those questions are voluntary. So at no point would we base all of our decision on a single question. And in fact, those questions can be skipped by participants should they read a comment such as the objectives are clear and concise, and they might not necessarily understand the question or agree with the question or the statement, or are there in the survey to provide other kinds of commentary. There's also open text boxes that participants can use to respond to the questions. So the small error that happened, it was a small window in time. We have taken precautions to ensure that those respondents were not impacted. And it was early enough in the consultation process that I feel confident that we won't see any impact in that.
Time left. So, okay, so I'll speak quickly. What Vice Chair Rocha said and what Chair Shuttleworth said about as this policy is a mixture of already existing other policies and procedures and everything. And my question again is, we are not getting a clear response as to what is stopping us from implementing something that is already in place. So can we hear a clear answer for that?
Through you, Chair Shuttleworth, to Trustee Ahmed. Again, the simple answer to your question, at the risk of oversimplification, is that nothing is stopping us from enforcing existing provisions, existing definitions of professionalism, existing conceptualization of professionalism.
If I can just remind the gallery, you've been so good. Please try to keep your comments inside your head. Thank you. Trustee Rocha, or sorry, Vice Chair Rocha.
All right, this is my third question, so it has to be my last question. Through you, Chair, I heard the director earlier say that there's a committee working on this policy. Has the committee considered reaching out to the trustee governance document review committee to review it and provide feedback? I am a member of that committee, and I haven't been reached to provide feedback. And as is customary practice, policies usually come to the board at Committee of the Whole for its first presentation, and we hash out a lot of information before it makes its first appearance at a board meeting. So with this one, we kind of skipped a step. We came straight to the board meeting and we bypassed Committee of the Whole. Because had we gone to Committee of the Whole first for its initial presentation, I would have shared some feedback on some of the language that's been added to this policy that doesn't exist in any of our other policies, namely the second paragraph. And, well, that's just one of my comments. So my question at the end is, will this committee reach out to either the governance document review committee for feedback, or will it come to a working group for us to provide additional feedback as to the content of the policy. Thank you.
Through the chair to Trustee Rocha, we are absolutely in agreement and alignment in supporting this document through the governance committee. We are happy to do that. As Trustee Rocha can appreciate, we're working on a very tight timeline to bring forward a draft policy, but we're happy to bring it through the necessary venue that we can get the inputs that you desire.
Thank you.
Trustee Collard.
Thank you. Through you to the director, I will issue an invitation to 2 weeks hence. Our governance document review standing committee meeting will be Thursday, 16th of March, I think at 1 o'clock. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Trustee Collard. Is that March break?
Were you going somewhere?
Okay, I see no further questions on the floor, so I want to thank everyone for coming. That sort of ends our discussion this evening on the professionalism policy, and we're going to take a recess.